Hello, welcome to the Why Do You Like podcast. Today I'm joined by a member of the Metroid subreddit. Do you want to kind of describe what Metroid is?
Metroid is a very iconic Nintendo series that more or less founded the genre that we know by the name of Metroidvania.
So, how did you get into Metroid?
So yeah, it's a bit of a story. So I grew up gaming, of course, generally on Game Boy handhelds,
Mm.
and I was about 6 years old. One day, my brother, who had a Game Boy of his own and a ton of games, he was away. So I sort of snuck into his room while he was gone. I was just rummaging through his pouch of Game Boy Advance games. And then, yeah, like different games like James Bond, Lord of the Rings, this and that. And then
Mm.
I put in this one game, and it was Metroid, of course. The game was Metroid Fusion, but at the time, I was fascinated by it. I was playing as this person in this like robotic suit of armor who was doing flips and shooting out of a gun and turning into a ball and dropping bombs. And it was near the end of Fusion. It was his file. It was the third save file, the C file. He was in like the Turian looking area where you go to fight Ridley.
Mm.
So going through that area and like the whole aesthetic of it was fascinating, along with the music. And I remember fighting the space pirates and that yellow mini boss space pirate. And then I get to Ridley, and there's just this skeleton of a dragon. Its eyes start glowing, and then it starts screaming. And this just like startled me, but at the same time, I just thought it was so cool. I was fascinated. So I kept
Mm.
replaying that part whenever he wasn't around and just dying to Ridley and not really knowing what's going on, but being fascinated.
Mm.
So I talked to him. I started talking to him about the game and asking him about it. And then over the course of that summer, he started over the C file and played through it while I watched. And then in the fall, he got into PC gaming around then and sort of just stopped playing on his Game Boy. So I more or less inherited it. And then in the fall of that year, when I was about 7, I started my file in Metroid Fusion, and from there it's history.
That's funny. So when you were, I'm assuming you were like a kid when that happened. Did you ever encounter like the SAX or anything?
Yeah, I was because I was 7 when I was playing this, so the SAX did scare me the first time, and I remember like there was a recurring nightmare I had, which is basically of the Sector 2 encounter with it, the second one where it chases you. So I had like a recurring dream where I was in the game and being chased by the SAX, and that moment where you have to drop down and run away from it and it sees you. I kept sort of reliving that moment in my dreams. Yeah,
That's
I love
funny.
the SAX.
That's funny. Yeah, for me, so I had Smash Bros. 64 as a kid, and then I had like Melee after that. So I knew who Samus was from that, and then I'd gotten Metroid Prime. I think this must have been like the year it came out, just because like I don't I was like super into Nintendo games at that point. So and then I got Metroid Prime, but I was a kid and I was kind of dumb. So like I got to the point where you get the I think you get like the ball bombs, and after that I could not figure out what to do. So then I just like gave up, and then later on I got Metroid Prime 2 because they had multiplayer, and like one of my neighbors had it, so I wanted to get it too. So and then I'd played that for a little bit, and then the same thing happened where I was a dumb kid and I couldn't figure out what to do. So then at that point I was like, "Fuck this series! I can't do anything." So then later on, like I was like the year I was graduating high school. I had just always heard like Super Metroid was a really good game, so then I downloaded that on the Wii, and then yeah, I played Super Metroid and then I beat it. I was like, "Yo, this shit is awesome!" So and then I went back and played Prime 2, and then I've played every game in the series. I haven't beaten I haven't beaten Other M because that game kind of sucks, and I haven't beaten the remake of Metroid 2 just because I don't know, I didn't really like that one either. Have you played like all the games?
Well, technically, I only played the Blast Ball demo of Federation Force, but yeah, recently I played AM2R, and that was the only other one I hadn't played. So I basically completed all the games except Federation Force.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I haven't played Federation Force either. I don't count that one. So, how did you find out Samus was a girl? Was there like a thing, or did you kind of know like right away?
Well, that came from Fusion, but I it didn't really register with me at first because I was 7 playing it, and I just saw like this has to be a guy, and even though I kept playing the game and dying to Ridley in that section and seeing this animation of a girl bursting out of the armor, it just didn't click with me. My older sister and I played a lot of games together, like on the Game Boy Advance during my childhood, and she played Metroid as well, and it was basically her who just explained to me like that's a girl and Samus is a girl's name. When I was asking like why is a girl bursting out of this, 'cause it just I just couldn't understand it when I was a 7-year-old boy.
That's funny. Yeah, for me, I always thought Samus was a robot, but like, so in Smash 64, when you get hit when some sort of like electricity attack, you get this like cartoony like getting electrified animation for most of the characters, but for Samus, there's like a split second where you see like the outline of her body. So I remember like noticing this when I was like 6, and I was like, "Whoa, this is crazy!" Like Samus is a girl. I remember like telling my brother, what are the main things you like about the Metroid series?"
Well, atmosphere, that's a huge one. I mean, Fusion, that's such a great atmospheric game.
Mm.
The loneliness, isolation feeling, and just the sense of immersion and fear you get. You just get lost in these games and you feel like you're in the worlds, and I really love a good atmosphere and immersion. But I also just really liked the design of Samus. I thought it was so cool like her physical appearance and the suit and what she could do, turning into a ball, flying around in this force field, smashing through enemies, shooting massive shots out of her gun. I thought it was so cool, and so controlling her was always really fun to me. I really loved the combat and action in the games because, as I said, like her abilities are just so cool. It felt great to control her. So Fusion had a lot of great action with plenty of enemies and challenging, memorable bosses. So I really
Mm.
love that. So overall, it's like atmosphere, the immersion, the world building, and then the action sequences.
Mm. Yeah. But one of my favorite like atmospheric moments is it's in like Super Metroid. I forgot when exactly this is. It's like towards the beginning of the game though, but like there's a point where you're going into like into like Zeebs or whatever, you're going down the planet, and then you find some like dead soldiers, so like like, oh shit, there's like a boss or something up ahead. Like things like that I think are like super cool, that like they put in those little details that add so much to the atmosphere, you know? Oh, what are your favorite suit designs?
My all-time favorite's the Phazon suit. It sounds kind of bad, but I'm just kind of like a fan of like dark sort of sinister, kind of edgy-looking aesthetics. It's
Mm.
almost like sort of Black Knight looking armor with like the reddish visor and just the all black with bits of white. It just looks badass and almost like something out of a fantasy story, and I just love it for that. But I'm
Mm.
also a pretty big fan of the light suit. I think that's a really nice looking one.
Yeah, the light suit looks super cool.
Yeah, and then the like the basic Varia suit and Gravity suit. I'm talking about the ones in like the Prime games and Samus Returns. I
Mm.
actually I kind of hate her suit in the beginning of like the Prime games and Samus Returns before she gets like the big shoulder pads and the
Oh
Varia suit.
yeah.
I
Yeah, I
hate
don't
how
like
it
that one either.
to start with, but to me, like the Varia suit, that's how she looks, and then everything after that's just another cool upgrade. But
Mm.
yeah, Phazon's my favorite, but I love Varia and Gravity and Light.
Yeah, I like the fusion suit too, just because it's a little different. Like you could tell, like something's up with Samus at this point. You know, how do you feel about Other M?
See, I played Other M. I got that as a birthday gift when I was 11. I actually remember like the day it came out, June 27th. So it was funny, just funny story. Like I was so excited for the game, and my sister was like being driven hours away to this summer camp, pretty far away, and I agreed to go for that whole drive, just so we could stop at the mall in the morning, so I could get Other M at EB Games. And then I was just stuck for several hours. Well, I go into EB Games on that day and I ask them for a copy of Other M, and then they tell me, "Oh, sorry, but Other M got delayed to the 30th of August." And I just got stuck on this boring drive for hours. But birthday's September, so I got Other M then and played it, and I mean, at the time, I really liked it. I was a fan of like the storytelling in Fusion and wanted to learn more about Samus as a character, so I enjoyed it at the time. And I was like 11, so none of the dumb things in the story or like the voice acting really bothered me. I just thought it was cool and like a movie. And I
Mm.
liked the gameplay and the callbacks to Fusion. And thought it was fun. I haven't actually played it since then. It's been yeah, I haven't played it since the year it came out, 2010.
Oh
But
wow.
I was hearing like why is this game bad, and I was hearing all this talk about it being bad. So then I watched a bunch of videos and read up on it, and I couldn't help but agree with the criticism. Like the story and writing, it just seems atrocious. The voice acting makes me kind of cringe now, and I almost feel bad for being fine with it. And I can understand like the gameplay; it seems pretty mindless and more like a generic action game. That being said, I don't think it's necessarily a terrible game. I don't think it works well as a Metroid game based on all the stuff I've read about it and criticism and how it is. But if you just like think of it as a sort of basic action game, then it's fine for that. But yeah, as a Metroid game, the writing's terrible and it doesn't really have the style of Metroid.
Yeah, like I don't think the gameplay is like awful in it. Like it's definitely not like it's not like one of the better games in the series gameplay wise. It's definitely like towards the bottom, but it's still like not like bad gameplay wise. But yeah, it's like the story and like there's like so many dumb things where it's like, oh, you need authorization to shoot missiles, and it's like there's so many better excuses they could use to like not let you use missiles. You know what I mean?
Yeah, don't forget the classic one where you go into Sector 3, you're just burning alive, and then you have to run through it while burning alive, and then at the end, Adam then says, "Oh yeah, you can use your Varia suit now."
Oh yeah, that was so dumb. I wish I was like a fly on the wall in some of these like meetings when they made these decisions because I want to understand like what they were thinking. Like that just seems so incredibly dumb. Um, are you excited for Prime Four? And like, is there anything you want to see specifically in Prime Four?
Well, I'm excited for Prime 4, but I'm pretty damn nervous for it. I'm kind of pessimistic about it, not because I think the game will be bad, but because I think Nintendo's mismanaged it and not gotten off to a good start. And so my worry is that this game drops on the Switch at a horrible time, as it's about to be replaced by a new console. And then the game undersells, and then we go back to being in another Other M Federation drought where Nintendo just neglects the games for 7-ish years. But I think the game itself is going to be pretty awesome. What I'd like to see in it, well, I'd be pretty interested in seeing multiplayer of some kind. So though, if it was up to me, I'd rather just see Hunters as like a spin-off series for multiplayer. But
Mm.
since I don't see that happening, and multiplayer in Prime 4 seems possible, I'd be interested in that. I also just want the game to. I don't. Well, I'd be fine with it being like another Prime game. I want it to go beyond that and really be this huge step forward after 10 years. And I think the most important thing is that Retro, they need to go for broke on this. This
Mm.
game needs to. It not only needs to be really good, but it needs to be groundbreaking in some way. Because otherwise, it's. Well, my hope is that this game is the one that gets Metroid into the spotlight and opens it up to a lot of people, and then as a result, Nintendo gets interested in Metroid, and we get more Metroid games, and we finally get that damn Metroid Dread, which I've been waiting 15 years for now. In fact, I want that game more than Prime 4, if I'm being honest. But yeah, so like multiplayer and just doing some creative new things and being like revolutionary in a way like Breath of the Wild. I just don't think it'll cut it to repeat the Prime 1 to 3 formula. I think something new and bigger has to happen.
Yeah, I was gonna say I think yeah, like it needs to be like what Breath of the Wild was for Zelda. Yeah, like, one of my questions I was gonna ask you is like, why do you think Metroid hasn't seen the same success that like Zelda or like Pokemon or like one of the other like big Nintendo franchises has? Do you have any like thoughts on like why you think it hasn't been as successful?
Oh, yeah. So part of it's, well, of course, based on history, these games, they don't sell very well in Japan at all. It's mainly a Western thing. And Nintendo, like as a company, they're not really used to that. They're not used to their games being more appealing in the West. and in Japan. So it's almost kind of like, as a result, Nintendo sort of struggles on how to handle this series. But also based on the fact that it's not very appealing to many people in their country, it's not hugely appealing to Nintendo.
Mm.
Outside of like Sakamoto and Tanabe, if that's even how you pronounce it, how many people are really that interested? It seems to just be them. But then, of course, there's also the fact that it's just Metroidvania genre. It's a niche genre. A lot of people can struggle with it and the non-linearity and getting lost.
Mm.
You could like throw, for example, you could take a bunch of casual people who hadn't played video games. You could give them like games like Super Mario World and Mario Kart, and they would pick those up fine. They're really beginner friendly. There's a lot of simplicity.
Mm.
Give them Super Metroid, and they're either going to get their asses handed to them by enemies, or they're just going to get lost and frustrated. Also, Nintendo, they just appeal to like a more family-friendly market for kids. Metroid, one of the things I like about Metroid is that it's one of it's like their lone, darker, sort of mature series, and it's hardly an R-rated, M-rated deal, but it's still stands out. But as a result, their systems are generally marketed towards younger audiences, and that darker, gloomier feel doesn't attract as many people. And then lastly, there's just been a lot of mismanagement and poor business decisions. I mean, think back to Samus Returns. They took that game and they put it into production on the 3DS as the Switch was already getting ready to replace it.
Mm.
And then they released it on the 3DS after the Switch has come out. If this game had come out on the Switch and released in like August or September between Breath of the Wild and Mario Odyssey, I'm sure it would easily have like twice the sales it got. But then the other thing is, they didn't even necessarily have to release it on Switch. All they had to do was just put this game into production for the 3DS when the 3DS was actually new and popular. If this game had just come to the 3DS like no later than 2015, probably sell much better and open up a lot of people to the series.
Mm.
But that's not the only one. The worst offender is Metroid Prime 2. You know when they released that game?
What? Yeah, was that like right when the GameCube was ending?
No, they released it within the same 10 days that Half-Life 2 and Halo 2 released.
Oh, really? I didn't know that. Wow.
Yeah, they released it in the same 10-day stretch as the two most hyped, popular first-person shooters out there.
Mm.
And I'm not sure about this for Super Metroid, because I haven't read up much on that one, but from what I have heard, that game also came out near the end of the Super Nintendo's lifespan.
Yeah,
So,
I think that came out in '94, and I want to say the N64 came out in '95. Let me double check that.
Yeah, correct me if I'm wrong, but I've heard that Super Metroid came out when the SNES was dying.
Okay. Yeah. The N64 came out in '96, but yeah, it was like towards the end of the Super Nintendo life cycle, and that was like years after Metroid 2 had came out too. So
Yeah.
it wasn't like fresh in people's minds at all either.
Yeah, so there's just been a lot of these frustrating business decisions, and I'm actually I was reading an article the other day about Animal Crossing New Horizons' crazy success. It's sold like 22 million copies, and for Switch has only sold 60 million units. So like 1 in 3 Switch owners of Animal Crossing.
Oh wow!
A big part of its success is because it released at the perfect time during the pandemic, and it's the kind of game that appeals to people.
Mm.
But then there's other stats showing that all these other games on the Switch have gotten these significant boosts, like Xenoblade, Mario Kart 8, Breath of the Wild, Smash Bros, New Super Mario Bros. All those have gotten serious boosts just from all these people buying Switches.
Mm.
It just makes me so frustrated that there's no Metroid around at this time.
Mm.
I remember when everyone was expecting Prime 4 to come out in 2020 this year because they announced in 2017. But instead it got mismanaged and rebooted. It's like, imagine if the game had come out now and everyone's buying a Switch and all these Switch games are getting boosts.
Yeah. Oof.
Has me frustrated. It just feels like unlucky in a way.
Yeah, like, and on the like coming out at the wrong times thing, I feel like back then, back when like Prime 1 and Prime 2 came out, people weren't super interested in these like exploration like Metroidvania type games, where I feel like now like there's been a lot more success in these like games with a lot of like side quests and a lot of exploration and stuff. Like you see games like Skyrim, or you see games like Hollow Knight that are got like really really big. That I feel like if Prime had released now, it would be way like would have sold way 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 better than it did back then. Earlier you had mentioned that you played the Prime Hunters multiplayer. When I was a kid, I had the Prime Hunters demo because I think when you got the DS, it came with a demo. But yeah, I never got to play the multiplayer. I heard it was super duper fun. Can you kind of describe like what it was like?
Yeah, well, see, Hunters was the first Metroid game I got after Fusion.
Hmm.
A while before I got to play the bigger Metroid games, so mostly it was Hunters and Fusion for a lot of my childhood. And it always frustrates me when Hunters gets a lot of flack from the fandom because Hunters, like the game itself, was always built first as a multiplayer game.
Hmm.
It's in a way like the reverse of Echoes, where Echoes was a single player game, but then they have a multiplayer mode that's kind of tacked on.
Hmm.
Hunters is the reverse of that. It was a spin off, and it just, to me, it doesn't get enough credit for basically being the only first person shooter deathmatch multiplayer game you've gotten from Nintendo.
Hmm.
But deathmatch first person shooter, that's how you'd summarize up the multiplayer. You had the 7 playable hunters who you had Weevil, Candon, Psylocke, who that's the name I named after because that was my favorite hunter to play as. And then there was Spire, Noxus, Trace, and then of course Samus. You had 30 different maps to play on, and then 7 different modes like King of the Hill, Deathmatch, Capture the Flag, and so on. And this, it even had stuff like voice chat built into the DS. It's kind of sad, but in some ways, Hunters of 2006 has more advanced multiplayer than some of the modern Nintendo games.
Hmm.
But that's what it was. It was a multiplayer game first and foremost that came out for the DS, and it did its job brilliantly. It was very fun to play. I played so much of it. I had a blast playing it with friends, and a lot of the time I just went up against bots on my own and still had a great time.
Hmm.
You It was mostly like a standard sort of first person shooter formula, but the two standout mechanics were that alt forms like Samus's morph ball were main mechanics, so every hunter basically had a morph ball of their own that had different abilities and advantages to it.
Hmm.
And there's the affinity weapons where each hunter has an affinity weapon that when it's equipped as their weapon of choice, they get a special bonus. Like Samus's affinity was missiles, so her missiles would have a homing effect. Psylux, the one I love to play as, his weapon was called the shock coil. It was like a sort of lightning kind of weapon that you zap people with in close range. But when he uses it, every time he damages someone, he heals himself back up for the damage.
Hmm.
And so, like, yeah, it's generally pretty straightforward, but the few mechanics it did have were really neat. And the thing I really loved about the morph ball and alt forms was that you could basically go from a slower, more methodical first person shooter suddenly going to this third person view and getting really mobile and being able to close the gap or dart over to some cover really quickly. And fighting in that game, everyone had higher health pools, so you had these like drawn out duels. You didn't have it wasn't like whoever shoots first wins. Now you'd be fighting each other back and forth, shooting away, going into your alt forms, going up close, bombing each other, bludgeoning each other. It just felt good to play, and yeah, it's multiplayer game first and foremost, and it did its job great. I wish the single player could have been better, but it wasn't really the goal of the game. It would be like saying Echoes isn't a good game because Echoes had a bad multiplayer, even though it had a great single player.
Hmm. Yeah, yeah, I get that. Yeah, yeah, that makes it. Yeah, I really wish they would come out with it for the Switch or something. Cause yeah, I really wish I could have played it back then, but now like it's dead, and I'd have to do a bunch of like. I know there's like some sort of community that still kind of plays it, but I feel like I'm just gonna be playing with the same like 6 people, so it's not gonna be like really as fun.
there's a couple hundred people on that Discord server. I really wanted to play with them, but I can't get it set up, sadly.
Oh, okay, I see. So what do you like better? Do you like the 2D games better, or do you like the Prime or like 3D games better?
I'd say the 2D games I like better. I love the Prime series, but I started with the 2D games, and I just like how much faster and more fluid it is, and abilities like the screw attack I just love, and I love being able to fly around with the screw attack and space jump and smash through enemies and all those things. It just feels so much faster and cooler. But Prime is amazing in its own way, and I really love those two. But I started with 2D, and I just love the way it feels.
Hmm. Yeah. I was gonna mention. Like, do you play Smash Bros at all?
Yeah,
How do you feel about Samus's moveset in Smash Bros? Because I feel like, for me, I feel like they. So initially, like, Super Metroid was the last game that came out when like Smash 64 came out. So they kind of designed her around that, where she's kind of like really floaty and really like slow. But now like she still has that same like aesthetic, but in like all the other games, she's not really presented as like being slow at all anymore.
it's an okay representation, but I consider it a letdown. Cause yeah, I don't like how slow she feels, especially when she has literal super speed in the side scrollers.
Mm.
I know it would be broken in Smash Bros, but I don't like how screw attacks just this small upwards kind of jump that does a bit of damage instead of this weapon of destruction that lets her fly around.
Mm.
And her missiles, I just find them kind of underwhelming. They feel kind of slow and clunky. Her charge beam, like that's fun to blow people away with their charge beam. And like the charge beam was always good in the games, but it was never even as good as like a super missile.
Yeah, I was gonna say like I feel like they designed her moveset around her charge beam, but that's not really like a super like core thing in like Metroid. Like I in the Prime games, I kind of use it a lot, but in all the 2D games, I never really use it. I usually just use missiles.
I always used charge beam in the 2D games because I was always scared I'd run out of missiles. So I'd save missiles for later and then just never use them. That got trouble against Nightmare because if you try to charge beam him, he's basically unbeatable. But anyway, back to Smash. I wasn't huge around her charge beam design. I think the thing that irked me the most was her down special, the Morph Ball Bomb.
Mm.
It's just this tiny, tiny little bit of damage, and I know her bombs in the games don't do huge damage either, but they just feel so underwhelming in Smash Bros. But the other thing is, like, the Morph Ball is such a key part of her kit, and you can't really transform into the Morph Ball and move around or do anything cool like that.
Mm.
So yeah, I just find her kit kind of underwhelming because it doesn't feel like it captures the 2D Samus closely enough, and it focuses too much power into her beam shots, and her missiles, screw attack, and morph ball just feel kind of underwhelming. And of
Yeah.
course, she's slow and kind of clunky, and that doesn't feel good when you know how fast that character actually is.
Mm. Were you happy when Ridley got announced for Smash Bros?
I was always on the Ridley's too big train, to be honest.
Boo.
I was never huge on Ridley in Smash because like it's not the argument's not so much that it's impossible to put him in Smash because you could put anything in Smash if you wanted. It's just that he wouldn't feel like Ridley or just look very good if he was small. And to be honest, I still feel that way. But as for his moveset, I never felt like he added a very interesting moveset. I've never been big on Ridley in the classic games where he just flies around, shoots some fireballs, swings his tail, and dies in a few missiles.
Mm.
I've never been big on that. Like I would have loved it if they went more on took more inspiration from Metroid Prime for Ridley's moveset. I think he does a lot of cooler stuff in Prime than just the generic fireball dragon.
Mm.
But
Yeah.
like Ridley, that's the thing. He really did 100% deserve to be in Smash Bros. Like he was the most logical Metroid character, the arch enemy of Samus. He absolutely deserved to be in Smash Bros. And I'm glad that a lot of people enjoy it. For me, I didn't enjoy the way he played, and I just the way he looks shrunken down, it just bothers me a lot. And
Mm.
one more thing, it just kills me. It fucking kills me when I see Ridley, like, he just does it. He's this dragon, winged dragon. He can just fly through outer space, no problem, do all these things. And then his aerial mobility, like, it's just not quite that crazy. And then meanwhile, you get someone like King K. Rool, who looks like he should be in a wheelchair from clogged arteries. He's just flying stories and stories high while Ridley is struggling to get back on the stage. That just kills me that that asshole can fly so much further than the dragon himself.
Mm. I was always on the get Ridley in Smash Bros. Train because like my introduction to Ridley was the Melee intro, and in that intro he's like about the same size as Samus. I was like, nah, this is bullshit. He's not too big. But yeah, I feel like if that wasn't my introduction to Ridley, I would kind of be like, oh, he's a boss. He shouldn't be in there. But yeah, like you're saying about his moveset, I feel like it. I do feel like it's kind of lazy. Like I feel like it was made by somebody who had seen like one of the Ridley fights, and then they're like, all right, I'm just making his moveset because yeah, like he shoots the fireballs which are like bouncy, and that's like a thing he does in Super Metroid. But other than that, like his grab thing is also kind of cool because he does do that in some of the games. But and then like his down B, the weird like stabby tail thing, was like not really like a thing he does. And his up B, I don't even know what it is. He just jumps. But yeah, are there any games you've gotten into like because of Metroid?
I haven't really played a lot of the other Metroidvanias, although I've bought some on Steam and have plans to play them. But I mean, I guess you could say if I ended up getting into like Hollow Knight or Guacamelee, Metroid would be partly responsible because Metroidvania, that's like the reason I was going for those.
Hmm.
I've been playing Resident Evil, and I know that series is quite a bit different than Metroid, but it's the scary atmosphere and like the exploration and the
Hmm.
immersion sort of makes me feel similar to how I felt in Fusion. I don't know if you ever played Resident Evil Revelations on the 3DS, but that actually had it had a few interesting similarities with Fusion. Like both of them were like Revelations is basically set on this ship that's been overrun by a virus. There's all these secrets on the ship and like secret laboratories and plots going on. The ship is progressively getting more and more destroyed and damaged over the game until finally you have to do a tense escape sequence off of it. And just things like that just made me think of Fusion and how, of course, the Federation ship is constantly getting destroyed and thrown into chaos and overrun. So yeah, I guess like there's some very different games that sort of give me some of the atmospheric feelings that Metroid gave me.
Hmm.
There's one other game. This is very different from Metroid. I don't know if you ever heard of it. You ever heard of the Talos Principle?
No, I haven't. What is it?
This is the one of the best games I've played and my favorite game in a long time. It's kind of like Portal. It's a puzzle game like Portal,
Hmm.
but it's the storytelling in this game is very similar to the way Metroid Prime approaches story, and it's got like similar kinds of like atmospheric music and beautiful immersive environments. And again, there's a like in Fusion, there's the sense where you're going further and further out of your boundaries to figure out what's really going on and going to places you shouldn't be going. Like the game itself, it's a puzzle game like Portal with a ton of philosophy thrown into it. But it gave me some of those feelings that Metroid did because it had this beautiful sense of immersion, pretty environments, and wonderful atmosphere.
Hmm.
But yeah, I guess there's also Castlevania, which I tried out, and I tried Portrait of Ruin on the DS, and I really liked it. And basically, Metroid's gotten me into some Metroidvanias and other atmospheric games I enjoy because they give me similar vibes to Metroid atmosphere.
Hmm. Do you have any like favorite power ups from the series?
Screw Attack's definitely the favorite. I just never get tired of flying around through infinitely flipping, having this huge force field around me, and then just blowing up enemies. I just feel like an absolute god. That's like an awesome superpower to have in real life.
Hmm.
Yeah. No, I've come to really like power bombs over time, just for helping me clear out the really annoying enemies, discover secrets in the room, and then I guess plasma beam and ice missiles I also really like. Plasma beam because it's just so powerful. Usually when I get it, I can finally punish the enemies that bullied me all game. And
Mm.
ice beam because I love freezing things and walking on them for some reason.
Yeah, I was gonna say my favorite power up is probably like the ice beam because usually you're able to like the way it's designed is that like you can freeze an enemy and then use it as a platform, and I feel like that like works so well as just like a general upgrade. Like it's not like so there's a lot of things that are like a very specific upgrade that it's like oh you need the light beam to open like the light doors, you know what I mean? But like with the ice beam, it's useful outside of just like it's like in super intended use, you know what I mean?
Yeah, it's got this nice utility to it.
Mm. Do you have any favorite bosses from the series?
Oh yeah, definitely. Let's see here. So I really liked Dig or Not in Samus Returns. I found it really refreshing just to have a boss that just kicked my ass and forced me to get better at the game and master it.
Mm.
Though I died over and over again, I was enjoying myself. Finally beating him, the payoff with Samus blowing out his red eye socket thing, and then you get the power bomb and his body's blocking the way. So then you use the power bomb to vaporize his body into nothing. That was amazing. Also, the build up to him. I loved the chase sequences. It reminded me of SAX Chase a bit. He
Mm.
had great build up. Quadraxis, such a good boss. Just long and epic and fun. Has cool build up, and the Annihilator beam's awesome. And then Meta Ridley in Prime 1. I don't like many of the Ridley fights, but this one was just awesome. It was a challenging, intense slugfest.
Mm.
And then Proteus, Ridley, and Samus Returns. A lot of people are upset about Ridley showing up in that game, but I was all for it, which is funny because I'm actually sick of Ridley and don't really want to see him for a while. But I thought the boss fight itself was just so intense and challenging, and I loved that Ridley just felt like a badass in that fight, and I loved seeing the dynamic between him and Samus. Instead of seeing Samus cowering before him, they're just trying to kill each other. They hate each other,
Mm.
and teaming up with the Metroid to kick his ass was very fun too. And
Yeah.
I think the last one that comes to mind is well, it's from Echo's second temple boss. I don't know how to say it. Is it whether it's Chika or Chika? It's like it kind of starts off as like looking like a sort of whale going around in the water, jumping onto land, and then when you beat its first phase, it switches into like this dragonfly, and you're grappling all over the arena, chasing after it, shooting it. I just love that boss, the music, the environment you fought it in, and the twist where you think you've sunk it down, and then suddenly it emerges as this flying insect, and you're grappling around like Spider-Man chasing it. I thought
Mm.
that was pretty sweet. What are your favorites?
I really like the Spider Guardian from Prime Two, just because like you have to fight it in like the dark zone or whatever it's called, like where you're always getting hurt. So it's like this race against the clock. It's like so stressful and it's so difficult. And then when you finally beat it, you're like, oh, thank God! Like it's one of the most satisfying feelings I've ever felt in a game, just because it was so challenging. I also really like Crocomire from Super Metroid, just because like it was a different boss fight where he doesn't really have health, but like you have to use the missiles to shoot him back. It was very like different for that game. And then his like death sequence is like also super cool because he just like falls in the lava and like becomes a skeleton, and then you think he comes back for a sec, and then like no, he's just dead. Um, what are some of the other ones I like? I like Fantoon from Super Metroid also, just because like you don't fight him the normal way. It's like normally you just kind of like you he's kind of like unload, you know, but you hit him with super missiles, but then he gets harder when you hit him with super missiles, so you have to kind of be smart about like the way you fight him. And then I remember finding out there's like a trick where if you use your charge beam and then you do the little like jump, you're able to not get hurt by the little like fire attack he does. I remember feeling like really smart when I figured that out. Also, I like all the Dark Samus fights and Echoes too. I really like boss fights where you are the same size as the other boss. Like it makes me feel like I'm fighting like another person. Also, do you have any favorite like music from the series?
A lot of tracks come to mind, mostly the environmental themes, I think. So, the underwater Sector 4 theme in Fusion after
Mm.
you beat Nightmare. Love that one. It's just like it's a mixture of like haunting, sad, and mysterious. And it just like captures that feeling of being lost and not knowing where to go and just being at the bottom of the depths of Sector 4. It just captures it really well. Um, I love I think it's called Brinstar Red Soil. It's like an underwater theme.
Mm.
It's another great underwater theme. I like the Prime 2 version that's in Torbus Bog the most.
Mm.
The the Talon Overworld theme. It's not the theme you hear when you first reach like the Talon Overworld area. It's a theme as you get deeper into it. Do you know what I'm referring to?
Yeah, yeah, I know what you're talking about. Yeah, that's a classic theme.
Yeah, it's the second one. Meta Ridley, that's always a classic one. What else? Oh yeah, I really enjoy the Saris Yakuza theme. And recently we're playing AM2R. Have you played AM2R?
I played it back when the guy was still developing it, so I wasn't completely done. But yeah, I don't really remember any of the music from it though.
Well, so when I was playing that game, I thought it was good, but I was kind of underwhelmed for the first half. And then around the time I reached the Zeta Metroids and get halfway through the game, you come to this area called the Tower, and this is when the game just like became a full-on 10 out of 10 until the end. And you go through the tower, and it's in this Norfair setting, this like science research lab, and you do all this stuff, and eventually this lab, which is completely out of power, gets powered up again, and then the music starts, and it's like this really awesome techno version of the Norfair Magmore Caverns theme. I thought it was just brilliant. Yeah, another two the Rundus and Gandrata themes. Love both of those.
Mm.
I'm sure I could pull out a bunch more, but those are all the ones on the top of my head for my favorite Metroid themes to listen to. Mutated Emperor Aim. That one's epic.
Mm. Yeah, Metroid does have a lot of good music. I think like in terms of like Nintendo series, like I'd probably put like I think like Metroid, Star Fox, and Zelda have like the best three. Like I feel like almost all the tracks are like good and you can listen to. Also, Fire Emblem has really good music too.
Now, just with like music, it's actually crazy just how much good video game music there is. Like, you're actually harder pressed to find a game or series without good music. Yeah, you're harder to find ones without good music than you are to find series with good music. So it's like I listen to Metro music like, wow, this is amazing. Like this is like the best ever, and then I just hear music from other franchises like Pokemon, Mario, Metal Gear, Skyrim, and so on, and I just like can't believe how good it is, and it's a pretty stiff competition. I can't even really decide what the best music is because it's like so many gaming franchises have 10 out of 10 perfect music.
Yeah. Yeah, some of my favorite songs. I really like the intro to Super Metroid, like during the like when you start the game and then it does the whole like the galaxy's at peace, blah blah blah. Like that song is super duper cool. Also the main theme for Metroid Prime is super cool too. Almost all the music in Prime is just so like atmospheric and like it's so different than like any other game. Like, it's like techno, but and then it's like creepy. I don't know. It's super cool.
Yeah, the menu themes of Prime 1, 2, and 3 are all amazing.
Yeah, and like the menu, like just like the aesthetics too, like how it's like this weird like I'm not sure what exactly I'm looking at, like cells or something like that, but I don't know. It's like super cool and super creepy. So, what game would you recommend somebody to like start the series on?
So for that, I got 4 games total that I recommend. 2 of which are like the optimal games, and then the other 2 are play these if you can't play the optimal games.
Mm.
Optimal 2 games are the Game Boy Advance Metroid Fusion and Metroid Zero Mission.
Mm.
Zero Mission's built to be the beginner's Metroid.
Yeah.
It's got like the engine of Fusion and the guidance with mapped objectives. And then all the difficulty of enemies is really toned down. And it's a short, fast-paced game as well. It's great as like a beginner's Metroidvania. You'd be hard-pressed to find something better. But going back to something I said earlier in regards to Metroid not selling well, I think it daunts a lot of people with the non-linearity and the open-ended nature of it and getting lost.
Mm.
So for that reason, I think Fusion is also an extremely good option because, well, some people argue it's not a Metroidvania. I still consider it a Metroidvania, just a variation on the formula. Fusion's got mapped objectives, missions, and a story for you to work with. And the big thing is like you're going through these small areas that are like Metroidvania worlds, but each one's pretty small, and it's you know where you have to go, but you're not sure how to get there. And so I think for that reason it's really good because for some people they're just not used to that non-linear exploration at all.
Mm.
They're really not used to it, and Fusion's amazing for easing you into that. So for people like that, Zero Mission can still be too tricky because even though it's the beginner's Metroidvania, it's a very pure Metroidvania, whereas Fusion streamlines it a bit to
Mm.
make it easy. And the big challenge with Fusion is like the bosses and enemies. It's whereas I think Zero Mission and Super Metroid they put more weight of difficulty into exploration. So yeah, it's kind of like you can start with Zero Mission if as a beginner's Metroidvania, or if you're just struggling with Metroidvanias completely, Fusion is closer to the games you might be used to, while
Mm.
still being a Metroid game. But then if you can't play those, I suggest either Samus Returns or AM2R.
Mm.
Samus Returns, well, it's the nastiest enemies and really hard. It's like Fusion on steroids in terms of the challenge being in the bosses.
Mm.
You're gonna die and get your ass kicked constantly. But then the thing is, you have the scan pulse. That's like a built-in walkthrough to show you where to go if you want to use it. And then the game itself, like Fusion, you're just in like one area at a time. The areas are a good size, but you're not in the entire world. Whereas in something like Super Metroid, you're in almost the whole world at once and going
Mm.
back and forth. And then of course there's the Metroid system, which means you're always just in an area hunting Metroids. You know what you need to do, and you're in a small area, and you have a built-in guide to help you explore.
Mm.
So I think that one's pretty good. It's just the only problem is the bosses are going to curb stomp newcomers, but besides from that, it's pretty good. And then AM2R, pretty much the same reasons for Samus Returns, because Metroid 2, of course, has smaller environments that you go through sort of one at a time, and because AM2R is completely free. But in terms of difficulty, similar to Fusion and Samus Returns, it'll really punish newcomers, and it's not quite as easy to navigate as Samus Returns, even if it's one of the easier Metroids to navigate.
Mm.
So yeah, if you can't do the Game Boy Advance ones, go for Samus Returns or AM2R, but if you can do the Game Boy Advance, do Fusion and Zero Mission.
Mm. Yeah, if I had to pick games, I would say like Zero Mission's obviously like for sure. It's like such a like it's an easy game, and it's also yeah like you were saying earlier, like it's really like fast paced, and I feel like it's hard to not have fun playing that game. I also Super Metroid is the one that like really got me into the series, so I'd have to give it that. I don't recommend Prime at all, just because the getting the keys at the end of the game is the most obnoxious thing in the world, and I feel like I would hate Metroid after playing that if that was my first game. So.
It's just a response to Super Metroid. The reason I just don't really like recommending Super Metroid as a starter is just because of how hands off and open it is. That for a lot of people who aren't used to that kind of game at all, they just get stumped and discouraged. Which I feel like Super Metroid's good as soon as you've eased into the formula and have gotten good at figuring things out and exploring. But when you're new to that and like your mind's not trained for that sort of thing, you can just really struggle and suffer. And it's kind of like that with Prime as well. Well, Prime 3's better for beginners. It's best to just play them in order. And Prime 1, it's going to be hard if you're not used to Metroid, I think.
Mm. Yeah, it is one of these things where I think maybe because I played Zelda and there's a lot of like puzzle solving with that, or like Super Metroid didn't really come super hard to me. But yeah, I feel like I've noticed that some people don't get the whole like if you have bombs, bomb corners, because there's usually something there in video games, you know.
What's your favorite Metroid game?
Probably Super Metroid, Super Metroid or Prime, but I think definitely Super Metroid just because Prime has the awful key hunt and Super Metroid doesn't have anything like that.
No, I actually liked the key hunt in the first Prime, but the second Prime, God, I hated the key hunt in the second Prime.
Oh, it's
The
even
first
worse,
Prime,
isn't it?
I felt In the second Prime, the keys, like the clues of the keys, just felt so vague and confusing. And I was just doing walkthroughs with the Prime one. It was easy. I could just figure it out. And to me, it was just like a leisurely stroll over Talon for one last time to grab some collectibles and test out all my new powers. And then
Mm.
Prime 2 was just me having to read a walkthrough because of how vague and cryptic it was.
Yeah, my thing with that is I feel like it's like Super Metroid. The way the map is designed is that you can pretty much get from any one point to any other point like really quickly. Like there's always a quick path to get to anywhere basically. Where with Prime One, there are paths to get anywhere, but it's not like nearly as quick. And plus, you also always have to deal with like the loading sequences of when you're going down like an elevator or whatever that take like way longer.
Kind of slow paced, and I'm not the only one to hope that Prime 4 gives Samus faster move speed, kind of like how the Doom Slayer moves pretty damn quick in Doom, despite it being a first person shooter.
Mm. Yeah, part of me thinks they're not gonna do that though, just because I feel like they're gonna want to focus on the exploration, and that's kind of like they always kind of nerf your movement when you have to deal with like, a lot of exploration. Like I feel like in Breath of the Wild, like Link moves pretty slowly compared to a lot of the other games, because a lot of the other games you're able to do like the side hops and stuff to go really fast, but they kind of took that out in Breath of the Wild. I feel like that's like Nintendo's philosophy when it comes to exploration. I don't like.
I think my favorite Metroid's definitely Fusion. It got me into the series, and to me, it just has some of the greatest action and atmosphere in the series. The SAX was awesome. I thought it approached storytelling and Samus's character in a really neat way, and for that reason, I'm just obsessed with Metroid Dread. And there were a lot of rumors about Metroid Dread throughout this year because the person saying Paper Mario would come to Switch was also saying Metroid 5 is coming. So I was getting my hopes up a little too much, and I think so was most of the Metroid subreddit.
Yeah.
But it looks like at this point, it really looks like at this point, there's just going to be nothing till Prime 4. The only hope is that Nintendo has a direct plan soon, or that Nintendo does have Dread ready, but they're just withholding it because they don't really need to promote games when their system's selling despite not releasing new games.
The Prime trilogy has been like rumored a lot for the past couple of years too. I feel like that's almost guaranteed to happen.
Yeah, it's such a no-brainer, but I'm worried that Nintendo just won't do it, even though it's so obvious. My
Classic
hope is
Nintendo.
the Metroid Prime collection. Bring in all the games under the Prime name, even Federation Force. And that includes having hunters and pinball,
Mm.
and then give these games online multiplayer. But I've just been wondering like what Mercury Steam has actually been doing ever since they finished with Samus Returns. Like it's been 3 years now. It seemed like both Mercury Steam and Sakamoto seemed to really happy with the partnership. Sakamoto seemed to be hinting at more Metroid, and then of course there's the 100% tease where it seems like they're teasing Metroid 5 in the game. And of course there's references to Fusion throughout. Like it seemed that Sakamoto and Mercury Steam were happy with the partnership. You could tell that Mercury Steam wanted to do more, and for 3 years now they've been silent. So I'm asking myself, like, are they working on a new Metroid? Like, shouldn't it be coming out right about now if they have one?
Mm.
Do you have any thoughts on that?
I have. So what? There's one of these things that I'm not really sure how the pandemic has affected stuff, just because they might be thinking like, oh, people might not have like a lot of money right now, so we shouldn't release it. I could see them like having that thought, but at the same time, like Animal Crossing and like Smash Bros. And all those things you were saying earlier have sold like super well during the pandemic. It might just be one of these things where they're really not sure about like what they should be doing, you know? Like they might have these games like ready to release, but they just might not be sure like when to release them, you know?
Yeah, and if they do have Metroid Dread and they're withholding it because Animal Crossing is selling so much that they don't even need to show off new games to make money, that just makes me all the more bitter and jealous that if Metroid had released now, it would get the exact same big boost that all these other series are getting.
Yeah.
And it would rake in many more copies just off that alone.
Mm.
It's looking like it's gonna come out after the pandemic and not reap those rewards.
Mm. So, do you have any like final thoughts on the series?
I really wanted to grow and try new things and expand, and most importantly, I just want it to sell well, so we don't have to keep waiting 7 years and having all this happen. Like it's one of Nintendo's very best franchises. It's one of the few franchises with like that they have that can go toe to toe with the best games of like the Zelda and Mario series.
Mm.
It's like one of the few ones that has Game of the Year potential. Like you're not. So, oh, sounds offensive, I guess, but like you're not really gonna see that from Pokemon or like Kirby or some series like that. Like I love both of those, but the games in them generally have like a consistent quality. You don't really get these like legendary masterpieces out of them like you would from an Ocarina of Time or a Mario 64 or a Super Metroid. So it's just for a series of that caliber, with that kind of potential, it really does deserve better. And I just want to see it keep growing and not stagnate because of poor sales and business mismanagement.
Mm. Yeah, like to me, I think it's been like one of the most consistently good series. Like even like with like the main Mario series, like every once in a while you get like a Mario Bros. 2 or a Mario Sunshine that isn't like I don't hate those games, but they're definitely nowhere. They're definitely not like great games. You know what I mean? And even with
Throw a
like
Mario game to hate sticker stars through the game for you. I hate that game.
And then also like with like Zelda, there was like a long time where Zelda just would not grow. Like it was the same game over and over and over again. Like Twilight Princess, Skyward Sword, and then Breath of the Wild was like a breath of fresh air for the series. So I really hope we can get like a Breath of the Wild, but for Metroid.
Yeah. I guess I want to ask, what are your thoughts on the most recent Metroid game we got, Samus Returns?
I didn't really like Metro or Samus Returns. I didn't end up beating it. I felt like the problems with the original Metroid 2 were just that it was just like very repetitive. Like you had the same like Metroid fights, and they didn't really introduce like a super new dynamic in every fight. And then they made that same mistake with Samus Returns. And then also there's the other like the weird mechanics where you like freeze time and stuff. It just felt very like not Metroid and felt very like tacked on in my opinion. So and I wasn't super into that game. What did you think
That's
about it?
funny. Well, it's funny because that game actually gets a lot of hell from the fan base for not being close enough to Metroid 2. And then it's like for you, it's too close. And I'm not a fan of the original. I played the original, played the whole thing. I found it repetitive and just boring, and I didn't get what people saw in it. So I really like Samus Returns a lot. Like it was the first 2D Metroid I got to play since Fusion. I thought it did some cool experimental things. I loved the 360 aiming. I enjoyed the new graphics, and I liked the boss fights like Diggernaut and Ridley. Those are two of my favorite Metroid boss fights. And
Mm.
even though the Metroids themselves were repetitive, I felt like each individual fight was a blast. It's just that there were too many of them, especially the Omegas and Zetas. Those are really fun.
Mm.
And yeah, I just thought it had really great action, and it was like a nice return to form of the series. Not the greatest game, but it modernized things in an interesting way, and there's a lot of stuff they can tinker with and polish over time that I'd
Mm.
like to see. My problem is just that, yeah, they released it at the worst time and did put it on this 3DS. They didn't put it on the 3DS 7 or 8 years ago, and they should have, and then they didn't put it on the Switch in 2017. And if they'd done either of those things, it would have easily doubled sales, if not more.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm a fan of it. I partly like it for how different it is from Metroid 2. It's almost a new game.
Mm. Yeah, like I think other than the actual like Metroid fights, like it is very like new and different. But a lot of like some of the new stuff, like I don't know, like I was saying, I don't really like the new abilities you get. They just felt very like yeah, like they just feel very like not Metroid. Like it just seems like weird that Samus is getting like a time stopping ability and stuff. You know?
Well, a lot of people saw it as a reverse Shine Spark. There's a reverse speed booster.
Mm.
I like the phase drift. My problem with the phase drift was that it was like barely in the game. You get the first three Aeon abilities really early into the game, and then you get the phase drift near the end.
Mm.
And I think like all they make you use it for is just to run across breaking blocks. But I think there's some pretty cool stuff you can do with it, just in general, like for combat and slowing enemies down. And other puzzles too, like things on timers. It was fun for that. But again, it was barely in the game, and you didn't really get to use it against bosses much or do much with it besides a few run over these breaking blocks puzzles. And
Mm.
the other Aeons, they were pretty basic. Like you had the scan pulse. It's an optional thing. It's nice, good for newcomers. Doesn't matter if you don't want to use it. Then you have the I think it was called the beam burst. That's like the machine gun. And I love the idea of Samus getting like a full-on machine gun. I just didn't like that it was so costly to use that you couldn't really afford to use it.
Mm.
And the lightning armor, just a nice green armor, nice little shield. I thought that was nice. I was a fan of the Aeons overall. And I saw someone on Reddit talking about how like you could do a lot more with it in later games. Like you could have lots more Aeon abilities, and they could be like optional things. Kind of like how in Prime you could find those optional weapon upgrades.
Mm.
You could have like a variety of cool Aeon abilities. It's like optional side quest sort of rewards.
Mm.
And yeah, I think just with like a little tinkering, they can be pretty good. And then I'm guessing you're not a fan of the parry, probably.
No, the parry, I think it's okay for a 2D Metroid.
Because I find that usually like if you don't, I find usually the parry, if you don't enjoy Samus Returns, you probably don't enjoy the parry. But yeah, I liked it too. I thought it was pretty cool. I thought it was great in the boss fights. You get like a fun cutscene whenever you do it, and it's like a risk reward thing.
Mm.
Then you can do a bunch of damage. It's only
Yeah.
like the first hour where you really need to use it. That being said, the parry's good against nearly every enemy. And I think the biggest way to fix that is just by fixing the variety. Because if there's one thing that game did a poor job of, it's enemy variety. There just weren't nearly enough enemies.
Mm.
And all you needed to do is just have a bunch of enemies that you can't use the parry on, and then have some that the parry's good on and some that it's not good on. So I think with again, a bit of tinkering, I think the parry can be really cool. I enjoyed it as is, and in some ways it was awesome. In other ways, it was a bit unpolished, but I think there's potential there, and love to see a bit more in the way of like melee attacks from Samus, like maybe a melee option in Prime 4, maybe even
Mm.
a melee weapon as like an optional Aeon ability. That could be cool.
Yeah.
And with the lightning armor, her counter, it's almost like this. It becomes huge. It almost looks like she's sort of swinging this plasma-looking blade and freezing an enemy into ice and then slashing at them with a lightning armor counter was fun too. It's like you're just chopping them up with a blade, kind of.
Mm. So yeah, thank you for coming on. I appreciate it.
It's nice. Haven't really done that kind of talk before. It's nice to just talk about Metroid. It's nice to have a conversation with someone else who knows Metroid like